Hello, my name is Ivor Ambrose. I'm the Managing Director of ENAT, the European Network for Accessible Tourism, and I'm here with Isabelle DuCharme from Kéroul. We're very grateful for this opportunity to speak at the APEC workshop, and we're going to talk about the role of NGOs, non-government organizations, and working with national tourism organizations in the area of accessible tourism. So first of all, we'll just introduce ourselves, and I'll give the floor to Isabelle, who is in Canada.
Thank you, Ivor. It's a pleasure to be here today talking to you about NGOs and their link to NTOs. I am the president of the board of Kēroul now for the past 10 years. Kēroul is based in Montreal, Quebec, in Canada. And our mission is to improve the accessibility of tourism and culture in the region of Quebec. We evaluate, give a certification, we do training, we give information to people that want to travel. So we basically cater to the needs of both businesses in the travel industry and people who want to travel in the province of Quebec.
Right, and you have, as you say, a long track record there, Isabelle, going back 40 years. So congratulations with that.
Thank you.
A little bit about our organization, ENAT, which is somewhat younger. So we got some financial support to start bringing together different kinds of stakeholders, as we call them, people who have an interest in tourism, to talk about accessibility and to get the tourism sector more aware of what the needs of people with disabilities are and others with specific access requirements in relation to traveling and tourism, to draw together the good examples that we have in Europe and to try to push the message towards policymakers and towards businesses especially to take more care of accessibility as a fundamental ground stone for making tourism accessible for all. So we've worked together, as Isabelle says, we've been developing our skills and our knowledge, and we came together in 2014 in Montreal, which was a pivotal event, I think. We had the UN World Tourism Organization together with us there, and we developed a working plan, a manifesto, if you like, for accessible destinations. And I think that gave us a very important platform from which to continue. Interestingly, I think both of us, we've had this experience of coming from a disability point of view very strongly, but working now in all kinds of areas with all kinds of different people. So I think that's something interesting about both our NGOs. In the case of Kéroul and ENAT, one thing we have in common is we are trying to bring together many kinds of organizations and work with them because we have a common values and we want to share those values with other kinds of organizations. So I was thinking, Isabelle, about this issue of what can NGOs offer that others don't?
Yeah, I think when the first thing to realize is that there are tourism experts, there are representatives that are there for the tourism industry, but they don't usually have the expertise to understand the needs of people with disabilities and how to apply it to the businesses. What we have developed through the 40 plus years is that expertise, that the specific understanding of the needs of people with disabilities. Most of the tourism businesses in the province of Quebec are smaller businesses, but you also have big actors. So we have to, when we do our evaluation or certification, well, we make sure to adapt everything that we do in accordance with their specific needs. And through our collaboration, we have the possibility to reach out to the regional tourism representatives and organizations and tell them what we can do and what is needed and what are the tools that they could use. And our website is full of information that people can get, tools that they could need. Why should they become accessible? What would it do for their businesses?
Mm-hmm. And I'm just thinking of that you're advocates, but you're also consultants. So you're working across the field. But let me just ask you then. So how do you get your money? Is it just from membership fees, or you also get money through consultancy to support your organization?
Part of our funding comes from the Ministry of Tourism.
Oh, great.
Uh,
Yeah.
uh, some come from the training that we give. We also have some collaborations with, let's say, the Association of the Museums of the province of Quebec to go and evaluate and give certification to all the museums that are part of the organization. So that will also bring in some money. So some of it is consulting, some of it is from the training, a little bit from the membership, but not that much because we're not charging that much for the membership. It's more of a symbolic and a support area that we are doing for now. A good part of the money comes from what
Yeah.
the Ministry of Tourism gives us.
Sure. Okay, great. Because I'm just aware that people watching this, they might be thinking, so how could we start something like that? Or you need something to work with. And as I said, we started with some basis funding from the European Commission in 2006, and then we created our NGO. After the project was finished, we created the NGO in 2008. So for this sort of period now, since 2008, we've been working for 11, 12 years now. We're working towards, in different ways, to support our organization through the things that you're saying. We do some consultancy work. We tender for projects that have been published, and we also do a lot of our work through European funding. We're very lucky to have the funding support from the European Commission, but we don't get a direct grant. We have to compete for the money that we get. And then we have a number of experts who will work in the projects, whether it's on training or on developing destinations, supporting destinations. But actually all our officers, the board members and so on, they're all giving their time for free. We all have second jobs, or we all have a day job, and
Right.
running the organization is a second job actually. But it's very important, I think, that we have a network. We really need to collaborate to make tourism accessible for everyone. That's something that comes across very strongly. I mean, tourism is very much affected by the degree of collaboration that you have. Collaboration between enterprises and public sector in a location or a destination, but also the collaboration that you can have with the region or the national authority as well. And where it works, where things are working best, there is always this organizational level of collaboration which is working well. If you don't have that collaboration top down and bottom up working in a good way, you're hardly going to succeed to make your destinations and your businesses accessible. So it's I think it's as much about training people to understand that they're part of a chain. You know, we talk about this chain of accessibility, and we talk about the value chain in tourism. You're part of a chain, and if you don't perform at the right level, then you're going to be the weakest link, and things won't work.
Yeah, you're right in that sense that we see it. If I try to go, because I myself live with a disability, I'm a quadriplegic, and I get around in a motorized wheelchair, so that asks for a lot of planning. And if I want to go to a destination and I can't find any information on are there going to be any accessible transportation once I get to the destination, then I can't go. Or if I can't find out what accessibility there is in the hotel room, will I be able to slide my lift to get in and out of bed under the bed? Any one aspect of that travel, if I can't get the information, then I won't go to that destination. And that's what people need to understand. You can't work in silo. You can't just say, well, I'm doing my job. You have to know if everybody's doing their job. And I think that's part of what an NGO is really the link between all of these in each business,
Yeah.
uh, because then you can reach out and say, listen, there is accessibility in your area. We need the information in the lodging, in the activities, in the attractions and stuff like that. And I think that's part of what the NGO is doing that nobody else is doing, because the hotel industry is working their own thing and the transportation industry is working on their own thing. So that's
Mhm.
part of the work and the importance of the NGOs.
Yeah. I wanted just to come back and say a few more things about ENAT, because from our start as an organization, we've had part of our mission not only to improve tourism accessibility, but also to promote accessible tourism around the world. So, as you've also said, Isabelle, we've worked in this international way as well, international congresses, and we're often involved in workshops and conferences, and we used to travel in those days before COVID to pass on the messages and to raise awareness about accessibility in tourism. Part of our mission, really. Yeah.
Yeah, and we did meet in some of those
Yeah.
events that were around the world. And I think that's important. When you have an expertise, when you have some knowledge, it's important to share it. And sometimes you learn even more
Oh, yeah.
than you thought you would. So there's always a win-win when you go and share with local and international events.
Yeah. We also focus a lot on as I call it, awareness raising. Why is accessibility needed, and what's it good for, and who is it good for? Because it's very important to point out to the businesses that really they can gain a lot by thinking broader about the access requirements of people with disabilities and all the other people who have access requirements as well, especially seniors, older people, families with small children. They all need good accessibility. And that's why we also push for a universal design approach in the design of the environment and the choice of the products that you have and the services that you develop as well. So it's very important that we think of the whole community that is participating in tourism. And I think that's something that's also with the maturity that comes with the sector in accessibility, that we don't just talk about removing barriers, but we talk about enabling people to participate, all people. And right. I think that's a very important step that you need to push towards this idea of universal accessibility.
Yes, and at Kēroul, we used to only do evaluation and certification for businesses or for outdoor spaces and things like that. But we, in the past few years, developed a new concept of destinations for all. So it's a certification for an area. It could be for a city that has decided to be fully accessible at a universal level. All aspects of getting around is being taken into account. That's something more than just saying your hotel is accessible. It's saying what is accessible, because everything is.
If we should move on to talk a little bit about the national tourist boards and the regional tourist boards. There are a number of cities and a number of regions and national tourist boards. And what's interesting for these members, I think, is that they can actually use our NGO, you can use ENAT as a platform to talk to each other and to learn from each other. As you said before, Isabelle, we've been bringing them to workshops together. And also we run an email discussion group so that people can communicate with each other and pass on important information, whether it's new policies or some new funding schemes that one of the regions might be rolling out, and how do they conduct their visitor surveys, for example, on accessibility, and how do they actually count and gather statistics in this difficult area. These are things that the national tourist boards want to know, and they want to learn. They have to learn from each other, because many of them, they're trying it for the first time. And if you can give them some support and some input from their peers, from their colleagues in other countries, I think this is one of the most valuable things. Again, like you said, with a glue that can glue things together, and we can bring them together through our NGO. I think that's been one of our successes. We hope to bring together our NTO members in 2022 and start to work again on specific themes, because they have very specific interest. We haven't touched on this in our conversation just now, but the marketing is incredibly important. How do you market your accessibility, and how do you encourage destinations and businesses to market themselves as accessible? Because that's often a missing link. They can do a lot of work to improve, but then they forget to tell anybody about it, and that's the disaster.
They think if you build it, they will come, but they forget that if you don't tell anybody that you have accessibility, then people don't know. And especially if you're a business that already existed before you did your accessibility, then you need to let people know that you have changed and that you are now accessible. If they had their evaluation through us, then they're on our website in our database, and they will most likely be, if they are accessible or partially accessible, you will also be in our publications and in our Quebec for All website. It is not only information about accessibility, not only for the accessibility, but for the nice, what are the nice things that you can see and do on these.
Yeah, the
right.
experiences. Right.
So it's not just a fact of accessibility, but it is a beautiful experience. And you can do your own itinerary going on that website. So it is good for the traveler that wants to visit the province, but it is also, in a way, free publicity for those venues, and it's a positive representation of those venues. Remind people that you exist, and it's not just having your publicity in NGOs or in websites that are dedicated to people with disabilities, but it's also doing it in your own publicity. If you are a small business, or if you own a business that is accessible, it's also to publish it in your own documents and website, having it up front, not having it just showing somebody in a wheelchair that is using your facilities, or another elderly person. Being more open, even if in your regular publications that are not specifically addressed to people with disabilities, so that anybody that grabs that brochure or goes on your website and knows somebody that would need that accessibility can tell their neighbor or their friends or somebody in their family. Be as inclusive as possible, not just in the built environment, but also in the way that you promote your business.
Right. We try as well to give as much information as possible. We advocate strongly that businesses and destinations, they should develop their own accessibility guide, or we used to call it also an access statement. Tell people what you've got. You need to explain actually objectively what you have and even what you don't have, because that's the most important thing for the customers to know. And then they can make up their own minds if they can manage with that.
Right.
You've also got a step beyond that, which is to give certification. And I don't know if we should come on to that a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure. What we do, as I mentioned, is we go with accessible, partially accessible, and not accessible. We don't promote what is not accessible. And you touched a little bit on it. What we call accessible is when you have a mobility impairment, you have access to every public area without any problem. So you can go to anywhere that the public is allowed to go without any problems. When we say it's partially accessible, you can get around the museum, but when you go to the washroom, then there's no grab bars next to the toilet, or there's 2 levels, and there's only accessibility to one level, the other one had this only by steps. And that way the person can choose if they're going to go or not. Some people will say, I'm okay with doing it half because at least I can do half and I understand it's an old building and you can't put an elevator. Other people will say, I don't want to do it if I can't do it all.
And these requirements or these specifications, you put those in the description so that people can see what is the barrier here if it's not fully, And that's a key thing, to be transparent, because we've seen many kinds of certification and labeling systems, and the ones that just say, well, it's like a traffic light, green, orange, and red, or it's ABC, or it's 1 star, 2 star, 3 stars. If you don't know what's behind those labels, the stars and so on, it doesn't tell you anything. You really need to have the detail. That's so important for people because we have such a wide range of abilities and disabilities that people need to know exactly what's going on. So that's something that's why we talk about this accessibility guide, which is very important, because you may also include information about people who have, we are able to cater for people who have special dietary needs and so on. So all of those things come into the frame when we think about what the tourist might need.
Doing your own evaluation sometimes can be good, but depending on your understanding of accessibility, if you're not somebody that had any type of training or any type of work in developing accessibility standards, you usually don't understand what accessibility means. So it's always better to go to an NGO that is specific to accessibility before you advertise your accessibility. It's more complicated for somebody that has a disability to plan their trip. So the easier you make it for them to find the information, the better it is. If you have a website, there should be something on your front page that links directly to accessibility information.
Right.
Because especially, you might have somebody that is blind and that is working with a screen reader. So if they have to go down to the 3rd level before they can find information about accessibility, they're just going to think probably that you don't have any information about accessibility. Right. So the easier you make it on the person to get the information, the better it is.
Right. I realize that we're talking about a lot of stuff here that we also would, I'm sure you do and we do. We cover all of this in our training courses, and training is so important. We've been fortunate to get several projects in Europe to develop training courses, which we now have online, free of charge, free to use. We have trained tourist guides, for example, to guide people with learning difficulties. We have a good course for that, which is adopted by the Professional Tourist Guides in Europe, the organization, the Federation of European Tourist Guides Associations. We've also got training that's directed towards young people who are just starting off in the catering and hospitality sector. They may be 16, 17 years old, and they're learning to be cooks or chefs or receptionists. They are getting some training now in accessibility, but you must say, I don't know what it's like in Canada, but I think it seems to be that training on accessibility only happens if you have some really determined advocates to get in there and offer this training. It's not part of regular curricula in the hospitality sector.
No, and here we have good collaboration with some schools, but not, we still have some work to do. That's one of the things that we want to tackle in the next year or two, is getting into more schools, because we already give classes. Our basic course is 3 or 3.5 hours, and we're giving it to people in the travel industry program. We also give it directly to people that are already working in the industry. So we adapt our classes or our trainings in accordance to the people we are giving to. We have one for frontline staff. We have one for managers of businesses. Mm-hmm. We also have some that are adapted, let's say, for travel agents, that one will be a day and a half rather than being 3 hours. And lately, we've been working with the Montreal airport. We revised some training that are given by Canadian Airlines. So we are adapting it to the public that we are giving it to, and we are publicizing the fact that we do give that training because there are more laws that are turning into obligations for different types of businesses like airports and transportation companies to give accessibility training and to improve the accessibility of, let's say, airports and the different services that are given by those businesses.
Yeah. You know, in some fields, we hear about this phrase of business accelerators, and organizations that specialize in moving businesses ahead, typically in the digital field or in the creative industries and so on. And really, in a sense, our NGOs are working as innovators and activators to get people to move forward on accessibility. Maybe we just don't use the right marketing language for ourselves sometimes, because it would be good to see a bigger call out for, where can we get the accessibility information and how do we put it into our business? But there's also a very important role for the national tourist boards here and other related ministries, especially education. They should also be demanding accessibility as part of the curricula at all levels, I think. And this is something which is just taking so long to get through. We've talked for years about architecture schools that don't talk about universal design. They don't teach it. It's not on the curriculum. They only teach what's in the law, about accessibility. And that's really such a restrictive concept that, we only have to follow the law. No, you have to design something that's beautiful and inclusive and sustainable, and you have to make it good for everybody. So we need to change the agenda there as well, I think, in education and training.
Yeah, it should be transversal. It should be, and it, sometimes schools do have it in their obligations, but it's just a little 1 hour or 2 hour
optional course.
Yeah. So it's not. It has to be improved and it has to be mandatory. It should be that any project that is presented should only be accepted if it includes accessibility.
Right.
There's no reason to accept a project that doesn't include accessibility, especially since it is in the building code that you should, if you build something, it has to be accessible. So why would you accept any project that is presented but does not include accessibility? So that's another important issue. Anything that is being planned now should have a universal accessibility aspect to it.
Yeah, I fully agree on that. And of course, we've been involved also in some standards work on public procurement for accessibility. I mean, this is the key, really. If the government, if the public sector isn't requiring accessibility, then it's not likely to happen all by itself. The important thing is to flag this up everywhere. I mean, in Europe now we have a European Accessibility Act, which makes certain requirements on the delivery of some services. But no, it's not right across the board. It doesn't cover the built environment, actually, which is strange, but that's a political issue that still needs to be worked through. But I think we have an ambition anyway. It's our ambition to keep pushing the accessibility line, because that's the only way that you will eventually make tourism accessible for everyone.
As you mentioned, for your European accessibility law, and the Canadian accessibility law that we have now for the past 2 or 3 years, they're good things that are making some things move along. But if you don't have anything like the American with Disabilities Act has things that are mandatories, and that if you don't do them, then you get fines. Unfortunately, sometimes that's the way you have to go for the industry to react.
There are certain things that should be mandatory. I mean, and that you have to comply. It is an issue of compliance in many cases.
There's really a repercussion on your business if you don't do it. Because I think what we have worked together on, like the ISO norm, is a good thing.
On tourism for all, yes.
Yeah, and it is a good thing, but it's only
It's
but
voluntary. It's voluntary, yeah.
right. Again, it's NGOs and people with disabilities, advocates that need to remind the industry that that exists and that is something that they should apply.
Yeah, I mean, I think the standards are very important for a few reasons. First of all, it gives you that kind of common language. We know what we're talking about when we say accessibility, because here it's written down that we're referring to this and not to that. So people can start to talk the same language. It also provides a basis for this kind of, what are we going to require and what are we going to recommend? But then a business can prove itself against the standard and use that for its marketing and its advertising. And that must be the very best reason to do it. So it's an incentive, I think. It's an incentive that gives businesses a possibility, and public sector, because that tourism for all standard can also be used by the public sector, training and learning and that kind of thing. So it's very wide, but it also gives an incentive that once you've followed this standard, then you can promote yourself and be promoted because you're following that standard. So I think that's really the key. We like to lead by example. And as one of our good colleagues in Flanders, in Belgium, Peter Gijsels has said, if one destination or if one business is getting more customers because they're more accessible, then it's going to make other ones jealous. And that's probably the best reason or the best trigger to get people to act. They're going to see that others are successful if they follow the standard and if they prove that it makes a difference to their bottom line.
I have the best example for that is when I mentioned earlier in the introduction that we received a ULIS prize by the WTO for the product of the accessible road. Once we put that together, and it was only, it was the regions and the businesses that wanted to be part of it, that could be part of it. In the beginning, out of the 17 regions that we only had 4 that wanted to be part of the accessible road and only a few businesses. But then once they saw the publicity they were getting and how they were getting more people because of the accessible road, then we got more regions and more businesses that started. It wasn't us calling them anymore. It was them calling us and saying, we want to be part of this product because we see that our neighbors are getting more visitors and more publicity. So we want that too. So it does work.
Sure. I was just thinking that we may be coming to the end now shortly, but I was just wondering about the question of developing accessibility further and developing into the kind of quality tourism that everybody should be able to access. Are we able to provide models and patterns and plans for innovation? I mean, can you see innovation coming through the role of NGOs here? What role do NGOs play in this kind of area of driving things forward towards the leading edge of where we need to be in tourism?
Well, I think we do have a strong role there again because we have developed an expertise here in the province of Quebec. And, there are 9 other provinces that don't have an NGO like ours. And I think sharing that expertise, making sure that other provinces have the same support is very important. I think we also look at what is being done elsewhere and try and improve when we can and to help other areas when they want our help. The key here is to keep in contact and to go to those events and to reach out to other regions and make sure that we keep learning from each other and improving. So I think it's really our responsibility to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah, sure. I think we've got some good experiences from working with many of our members, of course, including the Ante Foundation in Spain. They're working very much on technology as well. And I'm just thinking that there are many areas that need to be developed and can be improved. And I think that tourism is a great arena for experimenting and finding new ways for new markets and for bringing people together, but also there's this thing about working for the community as well. And I know you're very tied to the community. Now, we're an organization that's more spread out, perhaps. I think it's very important that the tourism sector as a whole takes good care of the communities that are hosting all these visitors. And right now with the COVID, I just want to maybe move towards the end of this conversation. How can we support communities to get through COVID and to make the tourism work for them as well as for the visitors?
And COVID has reminded us of this even more, that the tourism business, it is a business. There is the accessibility of buildings, but it's really a human-centered business. If you don't have tourists, you don't have tourism. And so we have to make sure that we both reassure people with disabilities that there are ways to travel and do it safely. And also remember to talk to the businesses and remind them that when they take precautions and when they adapt to the COVID and all of the specifications that you have to do
Yeah.
to be able to greet tourists, keep in mind to make these accessible. You know,
Yeah.
I saw too many places where you had a place to wash your hands when you came in, but you had to press the pedal that was on the floor to be able to have the water. So how
Uh-huh.
can I do that in my wheelchair? Or how can the blind person find where the pedal is and things like that? So, you know, these things have to be understood and reminded so that it is accessible to all. So there's both aspects, I think.
I think that's a good way to end. We've all got many challenges ahead of us still with the COVID, the coronavirus. But I think the key thing is that we need to work together, and I know that you are doing that. We're trying also. We've worked with the UNWTO as well to create some guidelines for this, and I think the challenge ahead is still great. As you say, we've been working on this for a number of years, but every destination, every business can still always improve its accessibility. And I suppose the message from both of us is that our organizations are here to help, and we hope that there will be many other organizations like ours that can work in their own regions, their own economies, and bring together all those who can contribute to a more accessible tourism for everyone.
Yeah, and I think we are all interested in collaborating and in making sure that we can help each other. So right now we're talking about, you know, the APEC region. We're talking about you're in Europe, we're in America, but there can be some local organizations that can help you in what you're looking for, or the way you can improve what you're doing. But we are also, even though we're not in the same physical area, and COVID has definitely demonstrated how much we can reach out and talk to each other, even if we can't travel to other countries. So keep that in mind, that if you're looking to improve what you're doing accessibility wise, we're here. We're ready and we're willing to help.
Yeah, thank you. So thanks to everyone watching, and thanks to you again, Isabelle. And I'm Ivor Ambrose from ENAT, Isabelle from Kéroul in Canada. Have a good day, have a good afternoon, a good evening in whichever part of the world you're watching this. Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Thanks.